You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brooke-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And the next way that you can walk this path is by joining us for Waking the Wild Medicine, which begins in early 2022. In this crucible, you will uncover the wild medicine of your soul, the gift of the world that you came here to be. You'll create the potent ways to administer this medicine via your own unique embodiment in alignment with divine archetypal energies. You'll be liberated to become the fullest expression of your soul, giving your deepest gifts in service to the world. And in material terms, this means you'll become available for an abundance of connection, impact, and wealth, and anything else your soul desires to flow as you. You can discover more and arrange a call to explore whether this is aligned for you by going to primalhappiness.co/medicine. Looking forward to speaking to you soon, magical one. And now on to this week's show. It's with Marisa Goudy. Marisa is an author, word witch, story healer, intuitive tarot reader, a writing coach, and an energy healer who helps folks discover, embody, and tell their own sovereign stories. In this show, we spoke about the alchemy of sovereignty and creativity, the archetypal lens that we share on sovereignty, and how we can be compelled to create lives that are not really for us, but how we can then navigate and create from sovereignty instead. This is the delicious topic, one of my favorites, and I can't wait to share this one with you. Let's dive in. Hello, Marisa. Huge welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Leanne. It's great to be here.
Oh, I know. We are going to have a lot of fun together. We've not really been able to stop laughing before we've even started to record. So, yeah, and creativity and sovereignty, like definitely in my top 5, I'd say, favorite topics. So, yeah, we're going to have a ball.
Yeah.
So we were just having a conversation that already was starting to go in this like tantalizing direction where I'm just like, okay, I can't say anything because we're going to end up having the conversation before we start recording, which won't really work. You were saying something like often our medicine is found in the things that have been challenging, have been work for us. And you said specifically for you, it had been finding your sovereignty with your creativity. I'm paraphrasing, so feel free to say it in your own way, but I would love to hear, and I so agree, I see that over and over again, the way that we kind of take our own medicine at the same time as we're giving it, and I just love the way that you named that so quickly into the conversation. So, brilliant place to start. What was your journey to discovering that and to becoming your medicine?
I love this place to begin because we are called to be our own healers as we heal others, right? It's always that sort of dance, which I guess to begin in the middle, that's how I understand sovereignty, is that sense of we tend to ourselves so that we can tend to others and tend to the collective, right? So for me, sovereignty became an important part of my vocabulary back when I was a college student, studying Irish literature and Irish history and Irish mythology, Celtic mythology in general. And that whole idea of the sovereignty goddess as the embodiment of the land, as the part of the understanding of rulership and the stewardship of society and culture and the earth itself. And so that word had always been really important to me. It inspired my kind of Celtic misty dreaming self who wanted to go and, live in a castle on the other side of the world. Because, growing up in Massachusetts in the United States wasn't always as romantical as I liked to imagine. But so, I went on and I studied Irish literature and studied in Ireland for many years, went back to regular life in America, as one does, got a job, got married, got kids, had kids, and sort of woke up one day and realized 10 years later, where did that part go? Where did that big capital S sovereignty word go for me? I'm a writer who's not writing. I'm a creative who's sort of lost the thread in so many ways.
What were you doing at that point, work-wise?
When sovereignty really came back to me, I had been, I was home with my daughter, starting my own business, trying to figure out what my business was. I had left a job in academia. I was assistant director at a college library very suddenly when my mother passed away. My daughter was an infant. It was just too much to hold. And it was that sense of that, of course, I realize now was a deeply sovereignty making moment, right? Yeah. A moment of intense loss that led into a decision that had been coming a long time. I was very unhappy in that job. And I knew that this juggle of motherhood and work wasn't working for me because I wasn't passionate enough about the work I was doing. So went home, came home, tried to figure out how to balance and hold all the things. And in that process, recognized, wait, I've had a job since I was 12 years old. For the first time in my life, I'm really barely bringing in any money at all because trying to start a business while also learning how to be a mother and grieving one's mother is something close to impossible. And yet we get through and it makes us as we go. But, in that moment of realizing, wow, I've become so reliant on my father and my husband, and I've never been this reliant in my life. Not since I had been a college student, let's say, was a deeply difficult moment. And I realized in that same time, I'd come home in order to make my own way and had, in fact, lost that, access to my own creative well. And it was really what became a 10-year process towards, publishing a book that has sovereignty right there in the title, to recognizing, because I have yearned so much for sovereignty and recognized what it is not to have it, that is what set me up to go on the journey that would say, yeah, this is something that I know I can speak to and offer to others and see others when they're missing it, when they don't have that sense of self-agency, that sense of autonomy, that sense of knowing of the self, and that ability to express ourselves and access the creative well that's inside.
Oh, so gorgeous. And I can hear that we share a real love of myth and magic and archetypes. I love how that you weave that into your story. So how do you, with the work you're doing with people and the way that you are speaking about this, I can hear there is a real message that you have for others on this. Where do you see, or how do you see this lack of sovereignty shows up for people? What do you see are kind of common ways that this is restricting or distorting people's creativity?
Oh, well, the way I can understand it best and to describe it are the archetypes that I actually use in my book and in my work. And I use feminine archetypes. I do believe that both men and women can have access to the princess, the queen, and the wise woman within themselves. Whether you want to change the gender of those archetypes, that would be fine. But I really think there's something to be said for the fact that all of us do have that feminine power within us. What is it like to free the princess, crown the queen, and embrace the wise woman? I feel that all three of those are really vital, because I think sometimes when we hear sovereign, we may overbalance and get ourselves into being the queen. And that is that sense of, oh, I have to be in charge of everything. I have to hold everything. I have to make sure that I'm in control. It's like primary executive function all the time. But of course, that I don't think that works. I think that we also need that freedom and adventurousness and bravery of the princess, because she runs out to the edges of the cliffs, and she's not worried about the consequences. And then we have the wise woman who waits in the cave and holds space for all the timeless wisdom that is not going to be found when you are out, queening your ass off, essentially. It's the wise woman who holds place in stillness for both eternity and immortality. So when you ask about when you're not in your sovereign space, it's about looking at when you are in the shadows of any one of those archetypes. The queen is that sense of overwork and overburdened, and it just leads to burnout, right? And a lot of resentment because you have to do everything all the time. Oh, wait, maybe I don't. The princess gets into addiction and escape and just sort of fading away and not really wanting to engage with the real world, like living permanently in that beautiful castle in the mist.
Yeah, fantasy kind of, yeah.
Yes, which totally has its place. We need to put on our costumes and we need to dive deep into stories. And we want those to come back and inform our real lived lives, because that's when storytelling and magic and fantasy are really doing their work, right? And then there's the shadow part of the wise woman, that who could be so deeply sovereign in the sense of, this is who I am and what I've made and what I know in my bones. There can be that sense of withdrawal, kind of at the other end of the spectrum, that just says, this world is too crazy. I don't want any part of it. I'm going to go off and meditate alone and be in my own cave, again, to use that same imagery. And that gets us into kind of spiritual bypassing and that sense of, I will just keep, all that matters are my inner intentions, and it doesn't really matter what I do on the outside. So I think that when we either are over engaged or under engaged, we might look and see, I am not standing in my sovereignty, because it's truly about, in my case, I see it as a three-way balance of these different aspects of ourselves, but it's always that two-way balance of self and the outer world, both in terms of our intimate relationships, our community, and looking beyond to the wider world.
Oh, I love this. I love this. I can see a real, almost like they're fractals of very similar archetypes. The archetypes that we're working with at the moment, and of course I'm running called Wake the Wild Feminine, is the queen, the wild woman, and the lover. And I can see they're almost like different faces of the princess and the lover. I think are very similar, and the wise woman, the wise woman, the wild woman. I think there's those three energetics work really beautifully together. So yeah, I love those. Thinking back over my life, I can really see how I definitely did a different but similar journey to you in terms of kind of being in shadow across those various archetypes. And certainly going back, and similarly, my kind of like that sort of initiation onto the path of sovereignty was also my father dying and having a kind of big life change. My children were very small too. And also it provoked a complete change of job. So very similar to yours, interestingly. And I definitely had what you would describe as that over-functioning sovereign, in that I was a leader in a corporate, and it was kind of, constantly juggling small children, this demanding job. And it's so interesting how, even though it was actually, I'd say, quite a creative job, there was a lack of sovereignty in it wasn't really what I came here to do. It wasn't soul aligned. It wasn't from my heart. And I'd love to hear what you've seen, both on your own journey and that with people you've worked with, how those archetypes, or perhaps there's another lens you'd have on that. How do we go from just, creating versus creating from this, like, who we uniquely are, that unique, going back to what you're saying, that unique medicine that we are. How do we get to the place where we're creating from there?
I think a lot of it is this power of discernment that does not necessarily come naturally. That's in discernment, it seems like it's not a particularly beautiful word. It sounds very much like, you need a law degree in order to do it incredibly well. But I think it's also kind of that path to joy and happiness. So, as you're saying, your career had elements of creativity to it. It, should have worked. And that ability to sit with the shoulds and say, is this coming from the outside and what everyone else is telling me ought to be perfect? Because in my case, I worked in the most beautiful building you could possibly imagine. I mean, Gothic architecture, liberal arts college library, out of the magazines, and just, I will never forget, there's all these around this central, I can't even think of the word anymore, but, like it's that central atrium sort of space where 150 years of women's feet, it had been a women's college, had worn down the stones as they went up into these beautiful spaces with these gorgeous tables and amazing windows. And just, of course, that sounds like the perfect job. And then I would go into my windowless office and my soul would slowly die because, they didn't actually put, you didn't get to sit in the tower. That was for the students. As a junior level manager, I got to sit in the fluorescent box. But all of this to say is there are moments when life sets us up with situations that really look like they ought to be perfect. And it takes such courage. And sometimes it takes the universe giving us a shove in the most difficult ways to say, wait, actually, this isn't my path. This is someone else's. Let me open up this path for the person this job really is going to be for. There was another woman who stepped into that job after me. Goddess hope that she's had an amazing career and loves it. I took a path that has taken now 10 years of lots of detours and lots of difficulties and lots of questioning of, standing in the kitchen, those late at night conversations you have with your spouse in the kitchen where like someone is holding a dish sponge and someone else is holding a glass, either full, either a glass of wine or a cup of tea or something. And, you both start leaning on either sides of the counters and you're looking at each other and someone's gesticulating with a sponge. And, those were moments in which, we were in deeply dire economic space because of the choices that I had made. We had a 2-income home and I suddenly said, I'm quitting. Let's figure out how to do it. And, there was definitely times when it felt like madness to keep up this dream of saying, no, but I meant to create my own path. Sometimes it does look like entrepreneurship and creating your own career, but along that way, there are so many places in which it just seems like you've lost your mind to stand this far outside of the containers that ought to be safe and ought to hold us and ought to be fulfilling. And again, coming back to discernment and that gut check and that sense of, if I can get to my inner sovereignty knot, as I would think of it, can I trace it around and see I still have a path here? It's not that I'm ending up in tangle after tangle and replicating the hell that I left. Am I creating for myself a space that has more freedom, more room, even if it is far from easy? Is there more freedom here than there is restriction?
Oh my goodness. I love that you've brought this into the conversation. Funnily enough, I think I've had 3 separate conversations just this week about exactly what you're talking about here, that winding, detouring journey to get to the place. And funny enough, I did a review of my coach yesterday. I've been working with the same coach for 2.5 years now. And it's my birthday next week. So I said, do you know what I'd like to use this session for? Just a review of all the things that have changed for me that I've created over this last 2.5 years. Yeah. And he keeps kind of like old school notebooks, which I love. So he got his notebooks out, was flicking back to that first conversation and subsequent conversations he and I had had. And there was one, and it was lovely because he'd like written little things that I'd said. And there was one where I was talking about a course I'd run a couple of years ago. And I'd said something like, oh my goodness, I realize now I'm finally doing my soul work. And he'd written that bit down. And it's like that, I started this work. I mean, it's it's taken so many twists and turns. It's barely recognizable to the work that I originally left my job for. But I've been doing this since 2013. And it really was, a good 5 years or so of those, you're saying, twists, turns, like, is this actually ever going to work? This is too hard. Equivalent conversations that you had with your husband, I had with mine. Mm-hmm. And the conversation, so I had that conversation with my coach, like, my goodness, it makes me realize like how long it really took to feel like, I'm here. It doesn't mean that suddenly it's all going to be just easy and dreamy, but there's a clunk, I think, where you finally feel like, yes, here I am. I was kind of getting closer and closer, and now I feel like I'm in my lane. And I've had that same conversation with 2 clients this week who are kind of just edging towards that. And it's so easy to give up at the point where it's just around the corner. In fact, I have to credit my husband with this. One of those conversations, the dish sponge conversations, it was at a point where I did actually say, I am wondering whether it's, to stop. Is it time to stop?
Yeah.
And it's like we'd seen, I've got a business partner, hence we'd had seen, things really working, things going in the right direction, but we kept kind of like having these just like, do you know what? This isn't what we want to do anymore. And then kind of closing everything down and then starting up again, which meant like recreating everything. And it's just like, this is just too hard. And It was my husband that said, like, no, you're so close. Don't give this up now. You have to carry on. And I'm so grateful that he said that, because he was completely right. Like, the very point where I was ready to, that's it, I can't do this anymore, was the point that it was just like just before it all started to click into place.
Yes. And that's really that joy of having, in order for someone to reflect back your sovereignty to you and your own mission, it's that he has a sense of that for himself. And that's, that understanding of the reason we do this sovereignty work is for ourselves and everyone around us, in hopes and in belief that they're doing it too. And then we can keep reflecting back to one another and keep giving those gifts so that we do continue to grow and evolve together and on our own at the same time. It's just a beautiful symmetry there.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I constantly say sovereigns need other sovereigns. We really need each other, because it isn't the path that most of the world, this modern world, certainly are walking, is it?
I mean, goodness gracious, it's the trickiest word in the entire world right now in so many ways. I mean, coming out with a book called The Sovereignty Knot in February of 2020. Who knew what sort of birth, what kind of world I was birthing this baby into?
Oh, bless you.
Would I have written the same? I think I would have written the same book now, but would I have had the same courage to use the word sovereign? It would have taken a different kind of work. Because to be honest, for me right now, I'm actually more fascinated with the idea of the knot, even than with sovereignty, because maybe in some ways, like, okay, I feel like I've done that work of explaining what sovereignty is, and in some ways was, because there's a difference to it, especially in the US comes into conversations around vaccinations and so many other pieces that we don't necessarily have to draw into our conversation today, but we kind of know there's a weight to this term, particularly in 2021. And so I find myself called into the knot of things, because there is almost as that's the way into sovereignty, rather than inviting people to be with this big S word. I want to invite you into this knot, and I'm going to offer you the medicine, which is encountering your own sovereignty and these archetypes of sovereignty. And I've really been sitting with this in terms of, is this a cop-out? Am I being wimpy? Because I've been writing many different posts that I intended to submit to this and that, and say, no, not that kind of sovereignty, this kind of sovereignty. And it felt a little bit like, is it Shakespeare who says the lady doth protest too much? And instead, it's that sense of, first of all, finding like minds like yourself and knowing that we can discuss sovereignty in a sense that, like, we do mean it right here. We don't have to make excuses for what other baggage people may be bringing. And we create these welcoming conversations in which people say, oh, it's not about, having a bunker inside a mountain. And it's not about sitting on the beach and saying, I've got mine. Everyone else can take care of themselves. I'm doing a Marie Antoinette. It's much more of this beautiful lived practice that is related more closely to that sense of, it's a more perhaps nuanced and mythological way of saying, put on your oxygen mask first before you take care of those around you. Indeed, that's the only way to survive and thrive.
Oh, beautiful. I love how you define that. So I've got two questions that are kind of battling out for which one to ask you. I want to ask you more about the knot, but I'm going to bookmark that there's so much in what you've just been talking about that I feel shows up for so many of us, certainly for me personally, around this, like, oh, it feels a bit scary to express myself here because people are going to think this, which I think there's a kind of meta-ness to this. Something, about being sovereign in our sovereign expression. So we'll put that to one side for the moment, because I want to invite you to just share more about what you're talking about when you're describing this knot.
So the knot, I see us, so I've mentioned those the sovereignty archetypes before. I see them kind of working together in a Celtic knot, in that sense of we move from one to the other all throughout our lives, rather than living in a linear fashion that I think we're given as women, particularly with the maid, mother, crone archetype and vision, which is a very progressive sense of this, then this, then this. And then you're dead.
It's actually not feminine because it's linear.
Exactly. And it was crafted by Robert Graves in The White Goddess in the 50s. Like, it's not an ancient divine feminine tradition. It was a way that a scholar decided to create a framework. And, as a being who creates frameworks, I honor his creativity. I know it's helped a lot of people, but it's not an ancient principle. In the same way that, the Princess, Queen, and Wise Woman are my creation that I called through to help explain these ideas that I know I'm called to teach and share. So I think of the knot at that level, of the sense that, of that beautiful Celtic knot that is not tangled. It's just intricately woven. And then I also think of the reality of life with it, because we do not know what will happen in the next day or hour. We know that there will be a lot of tangles and snares. There will be conflicts coming towards us from other people and from the events of the world. We are all coming out of trauma and any amount of dysfunction and pain that, I don't think anybody's got their entire past completely untangled. I think that's the point when you've reached enlightenment and you just ascend to the next level. I think that we are all living in these knots because that's the nature of reality and the nature of life. And so what we can hope for is the grace and the wisdom to move through those and understand that, you and I were both sort of, I think you might mention it as a clunk. And I think it's like a sacred clunk into, like, this is the work I meant to do. So I adore that, because that's how it's like you're settling into that. I don't know, imagine like a children's game in which the goal is to put the peg in the hole. And it's not because you've arrived and you'll never leave this space. It's not because you're settling for this. It is that sense of settling of, I can settle into my own life. And as of now, I see that I have created this space and I've untangled these knots and I am able to keep moving through the spiral. Okay, come what may, I'm ready. I'm in this moment and very aware that I am standing at the center of my life, that I have created, and that I have the immense privilege and blessing to get to occupy.
Oh, I love what you've just said. I had this, as you're talking, I was visualizing this kind of going from, imagine a kind of weaving. and going from this kind of like tangled mess where we're just constantly in like, oh my goodness, I've got another knot to untangle, and oh my goodness, there's another loose thread. And then getting to a place where, just like weaving, it's constantly moving and evolving. It's not just one bit still, but it's got this coherent pattern where those threads are forming that same pattern, but time's moving, life is moving. And it's that coherency where you're recognizing, okay, this is what my knot looks and feels like, and it's going to keep moving because the strands of life do. I just suddenly saw that as you're talking. It's like, oh, I love that. There's something about it going from that kind of unconscious shadow way of weaving to this congruent, sovereign, conscious way of weaving.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's both your own work and your own passions, and it's what's coming to you from outside and what you're learning about, a place in the world based on where you live and your economic privilege and your race and your gender, and all these different pieces are always part of this bigger story. We're not creating in a vacuum.
Yeah. Our tapestry would be absolutely beautiful, wouldn't it? It would have like, dragons and queens and all sorts. It would be a particularly fabulous one. So coming back to the other question that I bookmarked, I love what you just shared about that kind of fear that's been coming up in you of being potentially misunderstood and, worst case, attacked for that. And thank you first and foremost for sharing that. But I thought this is actually a brilliant thread to pull anyway, because I know this really shows up for me and many of my clients who are more public in their expression. I work with a lot of coaches, change workers that are public with their work, whether it be in books or social media, whatever it is. And it feels to me there is this real dance, even when we are on this path of sovereignty, even when we are living in a way which is really devoted to being our truth, we're going to have things, times, people that give us this sense of like, oh, if I really am true in my expression here, it's going to cost me in this way. It's going to have this person judge me, or this person no longer like me, or this person think I'm saying this when I actually mean this. So I need to caveat like crazy or just not say it at all. And this, for me, is really that it's such an interesting place where sovereignty and creativity come together. And it's certainly a dance I've been in for many years. And then this year in particular, I could see how there were places where I was almost creating for kind of like validation and approval, not entirely, but like it was nuanced. I could see it was in there, like it was like every now and again I could see, this isn't just wanting to come through. I'm almost like forcing it in this direction because I think it will have that result. Or I'm not really feeling that I particularly am, inspired to write something at the moment. It's almost like I haven't written anything for a couple of days, so I ought to. And again, right. This wasn't the entirety of my creativity, but I could see that was like getting in there. And of course, again, going back to the work is to, be creating from this soul place, to have that sovereignty where we're not being tugged by those outside kind of like, oh no, it should be like this. You should be writing like that. So right. I would love to hear anything you have got to say on that, because I do think that is something that is going to be so helpful for listeners.
Yes. Oh, I love going here. This is so important. So I have like 46 pins to put in the things that you said too. So let's hope I can keep, untangling and weaving as we go. So the first thing I would say is that creativity is a very multifaceted activity, right? And we know as entrepreneurs, as women who work with other healers and transformation professionals who are often using their creativity in service to their work, in service to communicating what it is that they do, that has an inherent relationship built into it. There is that sense of, yes, I create for myself. I call through whatever this authentic inspiration is that is mine to tell. And I am sharing it for others. Yes, it's part of my business. It's part of my marketing. Let's be honest. We live in the 21st century. That is what's happening here. And it's also in deeper service to say, I want to offer you these ideas because I know they work, because I know that they will help you. They will make this world more beautiful, more bearable, more bold. Let's work on these together. I've called them through. I'm translating them for you, doing that alchemy from that raw, the guides told me this is what I needed to do, to here, I've put it into these sentences. I've put it into this program. I've put it into these bullet points, whatever it is, because communicating clearly is itself an immense gift. And so in that same way, that's part of what I'm looking at when I look at going, sovereignty, sovereign. You know, my writers group is called the Sovereign Writers Knot. Are there people who say, I really need a writing group. I would love to work with Marisa. I, want to be in that creative incubator space, but sovereign, last time I heard that was about the people at the yoga studio who say that their bodies are so perfect that they do not want to get the vaccine. That's where that languaging is coming in the US right now, particularly. I'm not sure if it's as much for you in the UK, but there's a lot of that kind of languaging around that. And so I have to pause and say, wait, where's my stance on this? How do I want to hold what I believe in creatively, what I believe in socially, where I stand in terms of yes, I believe that for me, I understand my sovereignty is to get vaccinated in order to help serve the collective. That's what I understand it to be. So it then becomes, is it a compromise to potentially remove that language in service to, oh dear, I'm afraid I'll be misunderstood? Or is it saying right now, rather than do the labor of defining that word so completely, and by the way, I have not removed it from my marketing, I still use it, and I still very much see my job as defining that term for people in a way that is liberating and of service to both the self and the collective. When is it time to sort of come back from that and say, this beautiful word that I know and love has a lot of different definitions right now. How do I work from the definition? How do I get creative enough that I am not held by that certain collection of letters and can offer these ideas at this moment in a different way? Because that is part of my creative calling. And I think that we mentioned the word discernment before. It's when are you compromising your beliefs and your ideals and your truth and your sovereignty? And when are you saying, I am looking around and I know that I'm a creature of this moment and I do want to be of service. I have these gifts to offer. How can I meet people in a way that is honest and real and perhaps is consciously freeing myself of some of the baggage that may come with the fact that I have no control over how other people use the Oxford English Dictionary?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It just occurred to me actually, as you were saying about the different meanings for the word sovereign, I was like, do you know what? It occurs to me that some of the juiciest, most amazing words do come with a lot of baggage and a lot of different meanings. I was with a client yesterday who we were talking about her course that she was creating, and it's very much about magic and power. Like, talk about two words that have just got so much baggage, so many meanings.
Yep.
And you could say, well, I'm not going to use those because people are going to think I mean this when I say magic, when actually I mean this. But as you're saying, we have that opportunity to allow them to be this, the weaving metaphor was coming back to me, almost like a color we're using in our weaving, but it's not going to be the only thread. It's not going to be the only color. It's going to be used within this overall expression that we have come here uniquely as.
Well, I love that. It's funny you say that, because the subtitle of my book is A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. And of course, sovereignty is right there. So I am well known of those difficult words that, and a lot of it is will I be respected in the marketplace, in the marketplace of ideas, never mind, on Amazon? If I use these words that are associated with things that are woo-woo or out there, or, that's, too girly, or whatever it is that, the patriarchal capitalist system has told us, no, don't do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
And therein lies, I mean, for me, it's kind of the excitement of being alive, and of being a creative, is saying, no, I know these terms have ancient roots. That's why when I start talking about sovereignty, I begin with the sovereignty goddess. She's the one who told me. She is thousands of years old and came before every single one of these contemporary political nonsense things we're doing to ourselves and to each other right now. And that's where so much of the magic lies. And I use magic often too. That is it's our birthright, is to be in that space of transformation and recognizing that we live in a world absolutely woven with the unseen. It's our blessing and our job to come and translate that for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah. I love that. What just come to mind was a word you were saying earlier, compromise. And it's got a real kind of like, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, yes. Yeah, we know when it's a compromise. And it reminded me of something I term the sovereign price, which is, so it's kind of like a sovereign price versus the victim price. The victim price is taken from, I don't know if you're familiar with Lynn Forrest's kind of take on the drama triangle called the victim triangle, which is if you're anywhere on the drama triangle, persecutor, victim, or rescuer, you're kind of in victim versus sovereign. And I define the sovereign price being that something's aligned for you. And this could be, again, a choice of words or a particular thing you're going to write, job, anything. But it might come with a cost. It might cost you approval. It might cost you, a relationship, all sorts of things. But you are willing to pay it to feel that sense of, this is me on my path, speaking my truth. The alternative is to pay the victim price, which you can do knowingly. Sometimes it's like, do you know what, right now, I just don't have it in me to like take the hit on this. I'm going to pay the victim price, which comes with that sense of compromise. It's like, we know that feeling, don't we? Like, oh, I've sold myself short, sold my soul even. I'm compromising here because I just don't want to pay the price, but we're still paying a price. It's the victim price.
Yeah.
And I think there is something so helpful to have that. I think partly because we live in a culture that is almost like overrun with compromise, like almost that's encouraged. Like, no, compromise is like where we should be navigating and what's actually a good thing to do. And I think to look at it in the way that you have, it's like, you know what, when we're coming from that place of compromise, rather than sovereignty, and going right back to your very first definition of sovereignty, right at the start, when you were using it, I'm not going to do it complete justice, but, in the way that this is service to others, to our community, when we're coming from that place, it actually has a far more beneficial effect than the well-intended compromise. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's what I just see over and over. Like, when we are willing to be led by that soulful sovereign place, everyone benefits.
Well, I think part of what you're saying too, and if I'm hearing you correctly, is that, I don't think compromise is always a dirty word. I think sometimes compromise is what we do in a relationship for two parties to come together in order to find a way forward. And of course, there's the other part of compromise when you're compromising yourself and your values.
Yes.
Where I call this in is that, and I think we're also talking about creativity in this conversation, right? When are moments of saying, okay, maybe not this, then perhaps that opens up an entirely new and different way to be in the world, to show up in the world. because I think that it's at our peril that we would understand sovereignty to be that very static definition of I am the queen of my whole wide world and I'm doing it this way and it's going to be like this, which is,
I love your characterization. By the way, I love the voices.
I have a 7-year-old who occasionally occupies this position, let's say. That is part of this. That's part of the shadow of that queen nature. Again, we can have it at any age. When the 7-year-old shadow queen does not want to get on the school bus in the morning, everybody pays. And as mother, I do compromise with whatever I can do to get you on that school bus. But that is to say, it's a momentary sense of compromise. I am not compromising my entire self. I am doing what I need to get through that particular situation. So, but to return to this idea of, as I understand sovereignty, it's a very fluid thing. It's moving with that idea of your vision of that moving, weaving, that constant process that we are in. If I say that my sovereignty, for example, is completely reliant on leading with the word sovereignty in every day and in every way, come hell or high water, I would say personally for myself, I'm doing it wrong. That it is going to be a constant work in progress. And that's the way that I want it. And there's other ways to be creative and to show up. For me right now, I'm working on a novel that is going to be so steeped in all of these ideas of sovereignty, where I get to go and explore all of them. And that, could look at that. We were talking before about the darker side of fantasy and escape, but we also know that storytelling from a true place informs us in what we do next. So I think it's to say, we are meant to be responsive rather than reactive and rather than static. So how can we be in that and constantly move with, we know that sovereignty itself, sovereign, has so many definitions. It's related to you think about the money and the British sovereign as being that piece of gold is one of so many different definitions. And how do we continue to define whatever term it is that means so much to us in a really multifaceted way that honors all of our facets? Because as I hear you talking about that victim price, my first response was, I absolutely hear that. I know when I've paid that. And sometimes you pay that because there's other places that you need to hold, you're holding on to your sovereign price.
Yes.
You can be both at the same time, because there are, there's your lover, your partner, there's your business associates, there's your clients, there's your kids, there's your mother-in-law. There are so many different relationships and ways that we show up. I would love to say I'm completely sovereign in every single one of them all the time, but I'd be lying to you.
Yes. No, I love that you brought it there. I often say, the lovely thing is we can be sovereign and choose to pay the victim price. That is a paradox, but I completely agree with you. Yeah. Oh my goodness, we're out of time and this is absolutely flown by. I just love where this has taken us. Really, really delightful. And again, anyone that loves talking about archetypes, it's always going to be a favorite conversation for me. Where can listeners find out more about you and your work and your books and everything else that you do?
My website, marisagoudy.com, is the home for all of the things. My book, The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic, full of all sorts of big and difficult words. In the title, I do like to write clearly. I do believe it's very accessible. Is available just about anywhere in the world. And that's a beautiful place to begin, I think. But I'm on Instagram and Facebook and those usual online places. But I would love to, hear from your listeners about their sovereign journey. I'm excited to keep following along with yours.
Oh, thank you so much. This really has been a pleasure. What a gorgeous topic.
Thank you.
Oh, what a fabulous show. Here are my takeaways. I love how Marisa spoke to sovereignty right at the beginning. It's about tending to ourselves so that we can tend to others and tend to the collective. There's such a helpful knowing therein that By living in a way that can seem selfish, it's actually anything but. Sovereign creativity requires discernment, to be guided by deeper knowing of what's right for us rather than shoulds and what's seemingly perfect, but perfect for someone else. Lastly, sometimes compromise is what's called for. However, being sovereign is about living and creating in a way that's aligned for our souls rather than a life of compromise. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, do hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 344. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.